I always thought I was the kind of guy who had it all figured out. Loyalty, stability, family, those were the things I believed in. I married Clara because she was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, ambitious, passionate. Hell, she could light up a room just by walking into it. We built a life together, a home, and it felt like we were on the same page. I was convinced that we'd be one of those couples that made it through the ups and downs. I thought we were untouchable. At first, it seemed like we were living the dream. We did everything right. Got a nice house, took vacations when we could, had our date nights, all the usual stuff that comes with marriage. We'd talk about the future, our plans. I could see us growing old together, looking back at everything with pride. That's what I thought. But somewhere along the way, Clara started to change. It wasn't anything huge at first, just little things I brushed off. She'd come home late from work, say she was caught up in meetings or had a ton of things to finish. Then it was more days, then a week, and before I knew it, we weren't spending as much time together anymore. I'd ask her what was going on, and she'd just say that she was busy or stressed, or just needed some space. I figured she was just dealing with work stuff. She was always the type who wanted to climb the corporate ladder, always working towards the next promotion, the next goal. I respected that about her. Hell, I admired it. So, I didn't think much of it. We still had our moments, the quiet dinners, the occasional laugh, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. But, of course, I never pushed too hard. I trusted her. She was my wife. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed it sooner. Maybe I should have realized that it wasn't just work stress or her ambition that was pulling her away. I didn't. I got caught up in my own routine too. You know how it goes. Work, pay the bills, get through the day, and hope for a little peace and quiet at the end of it. I didn't want to admit that something might be wrong, not when everything else in our life seemed so normal on the surface. Things didn't seem to get any better, but they didn't seem worse either. It was like we were just coasting. Clara seemed distant. She'd spend more time on her phone, always typing away or scrolling through messages. If I asked her who she was talking to, she'd just brush it off. Just work stuff, she'd say. But it didn't feel like just work. There was this coldness to her now, a barrier that I couldn't break through no matter how hard I tried. And I was trying. But the harder I tried, the more she pulled away. One night, I was on the couch, flipping through channels, when I saw her phone on the kitchen counter. For some reason, I picked it up. I don't know why. Maybe I was just fed up with the distance between us, or maybe I was looking for something to explain it. I guess, deep down, I knew something was off, and I had to see it for myself. There it was, sitting in her messages, a name I didn't recognize. Julian. I didn't think much of it at first. Could have been a colleague, a friend. But then I saw the text exchange. It wasn't the work stuff she'd been telling me about. It wasn't anything professional. It was personal. It was intimate. It hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach dropped, and my heart felt like it was suffocating in my chest. There were messages about how much she missed him, how she couldn't wait to see him again, how she felt alive when they were together. My mind started racing, trying to process what I was seeing. But it was like a fog settled over everything. I couldn't even focus on the words anymore. I had to be imagining things, right? I mean, she couldn't possibly be cheating on me, could she? Not Clara. Not my wife, the woman I thought I knew inside and out. But I kept scrolling. There was more, way more. The messages weren't innocent, not even close. They were talking about meeting up, talking about what they'd do together when they saw each other again. It was clear as day now. I don't remember how long I stood there, just staring at her phone, my hands shaking. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. I was too shocked to even feel angry. It was like I was paralyzed, just stuck in this moment of disbelief. But eventually, I made myself put the phone down. I couldn't deal with this right now. I needed to confront her, but my mind was a mess, and I wasn't ready to go there yet. So, I just sat on the couch, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. The next few days were a blur. I kept replaying that moment with her phone over and over in my head. Every word, every line of text, like some broken record I couldn't escape. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do with this knowledge. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just ignore it. I tried to act normal when she came home. I didn't want her to know that I knew. But I couldn't stop looking at her, wondering how long this had been going on. Every time she smiled or touched me, all I could think about was Julian. Was she pretending with me? Was I some kind of fool in her eyes? It felt like I was suffocating. By the time she came home that evening, I was a mess inside. I kept thinking, do I just ask her straight out? Or do I wait for her to crack? I couldn't make up my mind, but I knew I needed answers. And I knew I wasn't going to let her spin me any more lies. So, I asked her. I didn't yell or throw anything in her face. I just asked, quietly, calmly, like I was trying to hold it all together. I asked her about Julian. I didn't even say I had seen the messages. I didn't need to. I just asked if there was something she wanted to tell me. She looked at me, eyes wide, a little too wide. She started stammering, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that I was misunderstanding things. She claimed it wasn't an affair, just some harmless flirting at work. She said she was feeling lost, that everything had just gotten so routine, and Julian made her feel like she was alive again. She even said that she still loved me, that this wasn't about me, it was about her needing something for herself. But, of course, there was nothing about us in that explanation. No apology. No remorse. She kept talking, trying to justify it, spinning her version of the truth. But I couldn't listen to her anymore. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper. She was so full of excuses, like she couldn't even see what she had done. The audacity to act like I was the one being unreasonable, to say it was all just me misreading things. I asked her how long it had been going on. She hesitated for a second, looking guilty for the first time. A few months, she finally admitted, as if the time frame made it somehow less painful. I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, staring at her. A few months. That's how long she'd been living this double life. Her face went pale when I told her I knew about the messages. She tried to backpedal, say that it was nothing serious, that she didn't mean for things to get out of hand, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was right there, sitting between us, heavy and undeniable. I didn't care what excuses she made anymore. The fact was, she had been lying to me for months, and now I could see everything for what it really was. I don't know how long I stood there, feeling like my whole world had been pulled out from under me, but when she tried to hug me, I pulled away. I couldn't even look at her without feeling disgusted. This woman, the one I thought I'd spent my life building something with, she wasn't the person I thought she was. The person I married was gone. I told her I needed space, that I couldn't look at her right now, and I walked out. I didn't even know where I was going, just needed to get out of that house. I didn't want to be in the same place as her anymore. The days that followed felt like a nightmare. The silence in the house was suffocating. I kept replaying that conversation in my head, every word, every lie she told me, until I could barely breathe. Clara didn't make things any easier. She'd call me, text me, leave messages. None of it felt real anymore. She was trying to apologize, saying she was so sorry and that she never meant to hurt me. She said she loved me, but I didn't know if I could believe anything that came out of her mouth anymore. But it was clear she wasn't sorry for what she'd done to me. She was sorry she got caught. Sorry that her little secret was out in the open. And honestly, that made it worse. She kept saying it wasn't about us, that it was about her, about needing to feel something again. As if I hadn't been trying to make things work between us. As if I hadn't been there for her through everything. I stayed away from her for a few days, mostly to avoid getting caught in another round of her manipulations. But when I finally came back to the house, I could tell she'd been crying. I didn't care. It didn't make me feel sorry for her. It just made me feel angry, like I was supposed to comfort her when she was the one who tore everything apart. She didn't have the right to cry anymore. She lost that privilege when she decided to throw away our marriage for some thrill. But even as she cried, even as she begged for forgiveness, I still wasn't ready to walk away from her. I think in a small part of me, I was still clinging to some idea of the woman I thought I knew. I wanted to believe she wasn't the person who'd thrown everything away so easily. I wanted to think there was something left worth saving, That was my first mistake. But then came the part that really broke me. Her response when I asked if she was still seeing Julian. I couldn't believe it, but she actually said that she wasn't. She promised she wasn't. That it was over, that she had ended things with him. She even told me that he had pushed for more, but she was trying to figure out what she wanted. She said she had realized how stupid she'd been, and that she was ready to make things work with me. But the whole time, I could see the doubt in her eyes. It didn't add up. Not for a second. And that's when I knew. I knew she was still lying to me. She had ended things with Julian, right? But she didn't end us. She didn't end her affair with the idea of him. She wasn't ready to fully commit. Not yet. I could tell. She was still holding on to something else. I didn't say it right away, but it was sinking in now. She hadn't just betrayed me once. She'd been stringing me along, playing me for months. So, I made a decision then. I was done trying to fix something that had already been broken. I knew I couldn't trust her again. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to admit for a long time. This wasn't just about her affair. It was about me too. About my own pride. About not letting her destroy me. But I needed more than just to end things emotionally. I needed a way to make her feel the gravity of what she'd done. I wasn't going to just sit back and let Clara walk away from this without facing the consequences. I wasn't some helpless guy who was going to let her wreck everything and get off scot-free. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, and I was done being the nice guy who just forgives and moves on. I wasn't going to be her doormat. I'm not proud of it, but I started to plan my revenge. Not in some dramatic, grandiose way. Just subtle, calculated moves to tear apart the things that meant the most to her. To make her life uncomfortable. To make her realize that actions have consequences. The first thing I did was take control of our finances. We'd always kept joint accounts, both of us contributing our share. So the night after that confrontation, when she was out with her friends, probably trying to pretend everything was fine, I withdrew as much money as I could from our savings account. Not all of it, but enough to make her feel the sting when she looked at the balance. I knew she'd be the one to handle the bills, the house expenses. It was a move that would show her I wasn't just going to let her walk all over me. I felt a little guilty about it, honestly, but not as much as I thought I would. If anything, it felt empowering. I knew I was putting myself in a better position to take control of my life, to protect what was mine. The next step was more passive but just as effective. I started planting seeds of doubt in her office. We'd met a few of her colleagues over the years, and I'd always gotten along with most of them. But now, I wasn't above using those connections against her. I reached out to a couple of people who worked closely with Clara, and I subtly dropped hints about her relationship with Julian. Not outright accusations, nothing that could be traced back to me, but just enough for people to start talking. I'd mention things like, I heard Clara and Julian have been spending a lot of time together lately, or she's been acting a little distant lately, huh? I wonder if everything's okay at home. Simple things. Small things. But the kind of things that get the office gossip machine running. I wasn't trying to make her job impossible, but I wanted to make her realize how much trust she'd shattered. She was supposed to be this confident, successful woman, but now, I was going to watch her world shift beneath her feet. As for Julian, well, I wasn't about to let him off easy either. The bastard who had been getting my wife's attention behind my back wasn't going to just disappear. I didn't do anything too drastic, no crazy confrontations or threats, but I made sure to give him the cold shoulder whenever I ran into him. I avoided him at all costs. If he tried to talk to me, I made sure to turn my back, to make it clear I wasn't the guy who was going to let him off with a smile. I knew the more he felt isolated at work, the more he'd feel the strain. In the meantime, Clara seemed to be spiraling. She was trying harder to fix things between us, but every move she made felt like a calculated attempt to get me to forgive her. She'd asked to talk, to work things out, but I just kept deflecting. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I wasn't the same person she had betrayed. I was different now. I had learned to be ruthless. And as much as I hated the idea of turning into someone who plotted revenge, I couldn't deny that it gave me a sense of control. I needed to feel like I wasn't the one losing everything. The more I pulled the strings in the background, the more I felt like I was finally getting something back. something I had lost the moment I found out about her affair. It was a strange, hollow feeling, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something to protect myself. As the weeks passed, things started to change in a way I couldn't have predicted. Clara kept pushing for us to talk and work through this, but every time she came to me with one of her tearful apologies, I felt like she was just playing a role. It was like she was reading from a script, trying to convince me she was still the woman I married, the woman I thought I knew. But I wasn't buying it anymore. She had shown me who she really was. I kept my distance. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to work things out. Every time she mentioned it, I just nodded and walked away. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. I didn't even want to argue. At that point, I didn't care about fixing things. I cared about making sure she understood the consequences of her actions. And as time went on, things did change. Slowly at first, but the cracks in her perfect little world started showing. I could tell she was getting more frustrated. The office gossip was starting to get to her, and it wasn't just about Julian anymore. People started questioning her judgment, asking if she was really focused at work. She'd get these worried looks when she walked into meetings, like she wasn't quite as untouchable as she thought. That was when I realized something. She was starting to feel what I felt, the weight of betrayal, the constant sense of being watched. Only, it was all happening on the outside, in her professional life, in front of her colleagues. It wasn't just me anymore. I never brought it up to her directly. I didn't have to. She knew. I'd see her fidget with her phone or glance around in a meeting, clearly wondering if people were whispering about her behind her back. She knew what I had done, and she hated it. But what really got to her was that she couldn't do anything about it. She had no idea how deep the damage went, and I wasn't giving her any answers. I didn't owe her anything. But then, there were the moments when she'd try to reach me, trying so hard to fix the relationship. I remember one evening she made us dinner, tried to create some kind of romantic atmosphere. I couldn't even look at her. I sat across from her, my stomach turning as she asked me, "Can we just forget everything that happened? I know we can get past this." I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stared at her. And finally, I told her what I should have said weeks ago. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Clara. I don't know if I can forget." It wasn't dramatic, but it hit her like a punch. She looked at me, all the frustration and sadness flooding her face. She wasn't ready to hear it. And deep down, I think she knew that I was never going to look at her the same way again. Her whole world, the one she had so carefully built around her, was falling apart piece by piece. The thing was, I didn't feel the anger anymore. Not like I used to. I didn't have to scream at her or throw things. I didn't need to prove anything. The power I had gained from all those little moves, the money, the gossip, isolating Julian, was enough. It gave me a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in weeks. Clara, on the other hand, was unraveling. I could see it in her face, hear it in her voice. She was losing control of everything, from her career to her social circle to her relationship with me. And as much as I hated the situation, a part of me couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. She wasn't getting away with this. She was learning the hard way what betrayal felt like, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own life again. It wasn't long after that things really started to hit the fan for Clara. All the lies and secrets she thought she could manage, all the things she thought she could juggle and hide, they were crashing down around her, and I was just standing there, watching. She tried to pretend it was all under control at first, but I could see the cracks. Her work situation had gone from bad to worse. I'd known about the HR letter she got, but seeing the actual effect it had on her, that was something else. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was the beginning of her career unraveling. Her reputation was in shambles, and she knew it. She had to know. She'd gone from being the golden girl at the office to someone people were whispering about behind her back. All those months of pretending everything was fine, they'd caught up with her in a way she couldn't ignore anymore. At home, she was a wreck. She stopped pretending like she had it all together. She was falling apart, and I couldn't help but feel indifferent. Maybe that makes me sound cold, but after everything, I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. And then, she hit her breaking point. One evening, after she'd come home late from work again, No surprise there, she finally crumbled. She stood in front of me, hands shaking, looking at me like I was supposed to fix everything. She said she was sorry again. That she'd made a mistake. She told me she was ready to do whatever it took to fix things, that she'd change. But the thing is, I didn't even hear the words anymore. It was just noise. She was begging me to give her another chance, to help her salvage whatever was left. But deep down, I knew it was too late. What she was asking for wasn't just forgiveness, it was a clean slate, a fresh start. And I didn't owe her that. Not after what she did. I looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold, empty space where my feelings for her used to be. And it hit me then. I wasn't going to help her. I wasn't going to be the one to fix her life, to save her career. She had to deal with the fallout of her own choices. I told her that. I told her I wasn't going to help her. That this was the mess she had created, and now she had to figure out how to clean it up. I reminded her that she made her choice. She chose to lie to me, to betray me, to destroy everything we had. And now, she was dealing with the consequences. She stood there, frozen, staring at me like I'd just slapped her in the face. And maybe in a way I had. But I wasn't sorry. She needed to face the damage she'd done, not just to me, but to everything in her life. And then, just like that, I filed for divorce. No big drama. No yelling. No last-minute attempts to make me change my mind. Just a quiet, final decision. I wasn't going to drag it out any longer. It was over. The process itself wasn't easy, but I didn't care. Every step of it felt like a step away from the man I used to be, and into the person I needed to become. The person who didn't let someone walk all over him. The person who didn't let their heart be torn apart without getting something back. I think Clara was shocked at how easy I made it look. Maybe she thought I'd fight for her. Maybe she thought I'd beg her to come back. But I didn't. She could keep her guilt, her regret, her apologies. I was done. The person I was with her, those memories, that trust, gone. And I realized something else, too. As much as I'd lost in this marriage, trust, love, the future I thought I had, it didn't define me anymore. What Clara had done to me didn't break me. If anything, it made me stronger. So, the papers went through. And when it was finally all over, when the divorce was final, I felt free. Not in some dramatic way, but in a quiet, profound sense of peace. There was no more wondering if she was being truthful, no more second-guessing. I could breathe again. I didn't have to live in the shadow of someone else's lies. And yeah, I did feel a small, bitter satisfaction watching her life implode. Not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because I knew she needed to face the consequences of her actions. It wasn't my job to fix her, to save her, or to protect her from the fallout. I had spent too many years trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix. What I realized now was that it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own life. I was ready to move on, to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, to find someone who would respect me enough not to destroy everything we had. The divorce was finalized, and honestly, I thought I'd feel relief, but it wasn't as simple as that. It wasn't like flipping a switch and suddenly everything was better. It was more like I had to find my way out of this fog, one step at a time. The first few weeks were the hardest. It felt like I was walking around in a daze, like everything was in slow motion. I had this apartment now, small but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I was living alone. It was an adjustment. I didn't know what to do with myself at first. No Clara. No her rushing around the house. No waiting for her to come home. No pretending like we were fine. It was quiet. Too quiet. I wasn't sure how to feel. There was some guilt, sure. Some weird sense of failure, like I hadn't done enough to keep it together. But mostly, it was just confusion. I'd been so wrapped up in this marriage for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. But slowly, it started to change. Little things at first. I went out more. I met up with old friends I hadn't seen in ages. We'd go grab drinks, talk about everything and nothing, and I realized something important. I still had people who cared about me. I wasn't alone. That felt good, honestly. It reminded me that there was a life outside of Clara and all the drama she'd dragged me into. I also started picking up old hobbies. It felt strange, but I'd always been into photography, before Clara, before everything else. It was something I used to do to relax, to disconnect. I'd let it fall to the side over the years, but now, I was grabbing my camera again. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. The more I explored new places, the more I found myself. There was something freeing about seeing the world again through that lens, capturing moments that were just mine. It helped me put the pieces back together, even if I wasn't aware of it at the time. I spent a lot of time thinking about who I wanted to be moving forward. It wasn't about revenge anymore, or trying to get back at Clara. It wasn't about making her suffer or making her regret what she did. In the end, that wasn't going to heal me. What mattered now was figuring out what I wanted. For the first time in years, I had the chance to be selfish. I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and I didn't have to answer to anyone. The pain of betrayal started to fade, too. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Slowly, I started to let go of the anger, the bitterness, the feelings of being cheated and abandoned. Those emotions weren't going to serve me in the long run. I had been the one left behind, but now I was the one rebuilding. And as much as I hated that she'd done this to me, I knew something important. Her actions didn't have to define my future. One of the hardest parts was seeing Clara after the divorce. Not that we had much contact. She'd sent me a couple of texts, asking if we could talk, if I'd be willing to meet up to settle things. But I didn't respond. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that place. I wasn't the same person who had trusted her. I wasn't even the same person who had loved her. That version of me was gone. She tried though. I'll give her that. She'd send me long, apologetic messages, saying how much she regretted everything, how she had learned so much from all this. She told me she understood why I'd filed for divorce and that she'd been going through therapy. She wanted to rebuild her life. But I didn't care. I wasn't interested in her growth or her regret. That was something she had to face on her own. There were days when I thought about her, wondered if she was truly sorry or if it was just another act. But I didn't waste too much energy on it. I couldn't. What mattered now was me. What mattered was that I was finally free. Eventually, the loneliness of the early days started to fade, too. I got more comfortable with the quiet. I found a new rhythm, one where I didn't feel like I had to fill every minute with distractions. It wasn't easy, but it was getting better. Then, one day, I realized I had stopped thinking about her. I'd stopped checking social media to see if she was posting about how amazing her life was. I stopped wondering if she was dating Julian again. I had let go. I had made peace with it. And when I looked back on everything, it wasn't as much about what she did to me. It was about what I was doing for myself now. In a way, I had to lose her to find myself again. And maybe that's the hardest part of all this. Realizing that sometimes, people leave your life not to punish you, but to help you grow. I didn't need Clara to be happy. I didn't need her to feel whole. I had finally found the peace I'd been searching for all along. I won't say everything clicked into place overnight, but damn, it started to feel like I was moving in the right direction. Life after Clara wasn't the easy, straight line I'd imagined, but somehow, it was starting to feel like mine again. The things I'd given up, the parts of myself I'd buried, those were coming back to me, piece by piece. I won't lie. I had days where I thought about her, about the what-ifs and the memories of the good times we had. It wasn't like I could just erase those moments. They were real, and they were part of who I was. But I stopped letting them control me. I stopped thinking about the person she was with me, and I started focusing on the person I was becoming without her. The hardest part, though, it was learning how to trust again. It's not like I was eager to jump back into dating or looking for some kind of replacement for Clara, but it's hard to completely ignore the idea of love when you've spent so many years wrapped up in it. It's tempting to look for someone else, someone who'll fix what you lost, or someone who can at least offer the illusion of comfort. I'll admit, I went out a few times with friends, and there were a couple of dates here and there. But none of them felt right. I wasn't ready. And that's when I realized, maybe I didn't need anyone else to feel whole. For the first time in a long time, I was comfortable being alone. I wasn't desperate to fill the silence with someone else's presence. I took up things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I'd go on long hikes, get lost in nature. I'd get up early to go to the gym and start the day with something that felt good for me. I started cooking again, something I used to love doing when I had the time. It wasn't just about distracting myself, it was about rediscovering pieces of me I'd lost when I was so wrapped up in Clara's world. Then, I met someone. Not someone who fixed me, not someone who came along to heal the wounds Clara had left. No, this woman, Rachel, just fit into my life. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. But I could feel it when I was around her. She had this calm, easygoing way about her that made me feel comfortable, like I could just be without any pressure. And maybe that's the difference. With Clara, I'd always felt like I was constantly trying to be something for her, someone who could match her energy, her expectations. But with Rachel, it was different. I didn't have to try. I could just be myself. Rachel wasn't some quick fix or rebound. She was someone who made me realize that I wasn't broken. I hadn't been destroyed by Clara's betrayal. I had just been lost for a while, and I was finding my way back to who I really was. The truth is, I didn't need Rachel to make me feel better about what happened. I didn't need her to undo the past. I needed her because she brought something out of me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence. Real confidence. The kind that doesn't rely on someone else's approval. The kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you've been through and still standing strong. And I realized something else too. Clara's betrayal had been painful, yes. But it didn't define me. It didn't break me. It wasn't the end of my story. It was just a chapter. I still think about that chapter sometimes. I still think about the anger, the heartache, the quiet devastation of watching my life unravel. But I don't live in that chapter anymore. I'm not stuck in it. It's behind me. And I'm not the person I was when I was married to Clara. I'm not the person I was when I was caught up in that toxic cycle. In a way, Clara did me a favor. She pushed me to a place I never would have gotten to on my own, and as messed up as that sounds, I think I'm better for it. I'm stronger. I'm more sure of who I am, and what I want. And I've learned that peace doesn't come from revenge or from trying to make someone else suffer for what they've done to you. It comes from letting go. It comes from learning to stand on your own, even when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. I'm still rebuilding, but I'm doing it on my own terms. I've found my own rhythm again. I've found my own peace. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving towards something good. Something that's actually mine. The past is the past, but the future? It's wide open. Time really does heal, or at least it changes things enough to make them bearable. Looking back, I never thought I'd get here. I didn't think I'd find a version of myself that could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in memories. But here I am, and honestly, I'm okay with that. The pain that once felt so suffocating started to fade away. Slowly, like a bruise healing, first tender and raw, then turning to something you barely notice anymore. I still have my moments. Don't get me wrong. There are times when something reminds me of Clara. Maybe a song we used to play, or a place we visited together. It stings for a second, but then it's gone, replaced by something else. It doesn't control me like it used to. The past doesn't own me anymore. And I guess I never expected that. I never thought I could let go of the anger and the bitterness. I never thought I'd reach a point where I could look back and not feel like I was shattered by what happened. But here's the thing. When you spend so much time holding on to anger, you don't realize how heavy it is until you finally drop it. I didn't need that weight anymore. After everything was done with the divorce, there was this weird in-between phase, where I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even the guy who had been betrayed. I was just me. And I'll admit, that took some getting used to. But as the days passed, I realized that I didn't need to be defined by any of that. I found a new rhythm to my life. Not a perfect one, not some magical everything is great kind of thing, but a steady beat where I could breathe. I didn't feel like I was constantly waiting for something to fall apart anymore. I stopped living in the shadow of what could have been and started embracing what was. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Rachel, as I mentioned before, was a big part of that. But here's the thing. Rachel wasn't a solution or a quick fix. I don't know if I'd even have started dating again if I hadn't gone through everything I did with Clara. But with Rachel, I learned that it wasn't about finding someone to fill the void. It was about finding someone who could stand beside me while I figured things out, while I built myself back up. We'd spent months just hanging out. Low-pressure stuff, grabbing coffee, talking for hours, sometimes just doing nothing together. That was the thing about Rachel. She didn't push me. She didn't try to make me move on faster than I was ready for. She just let me be me, and honestly that was refreshing. There was no rush, no high expectations, no pretending I had to be this perfect person after everything that had happened. And that's when it hit me. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to have it all figured out. For the longest time, I thought I had to get back to some version of myself that could fit into the life I once had. But what I realized was that I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I had just been through something painful, and it had changed me. But that change didn't mean I was less of a person. It meant I was becoming more of the person I was supposed to be. The idea of moving on from Clara was something I had struggled with for so long. I used to think that meant letting go of every memory, every part of that life we built together. But now I see it differently. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't matter. It means accepting that it's over and making peace with what you've learned from it. It means accepting that what happened, while painful, wasn't the end of the world. It was just a chapter in a much bigger story. I don't have the answers. I don't have some grand lesson that I can pass along to others who are dealing with betrayal or heartbreak. What I've learned, though, is that time does its work. People do change. And you can heal. It's not always clean, it's not always fast, and it's definitely not linear. There will be days when you feel like you're back at square one. But there will also be days when you realize you've made it farther than you thought. You'll be stronger than you knew you could be. You'll look back and understand that, despite everything, you came out of it okay. And one thing I can say for sure is that I've learned to trust myself again. I know my own worth now, and I know that I don't need anyone else to validate that. I'm not some victim of my past. I'm the one who came through it. I survived. And that's worth more than any kind of revenge or vindication ever could be. Things aren't perfect, but they don't have to be. What I have now, what I've built, is real. It's mine. And that's enough. I never really expected to feel lucky again, especially after everything that happened. It felt like my life had been this endless uphill climb for so long. Dealing with Clara's betrayal, the pain of the divorce, the months of figuring out who I was without her. I'd been living in this quiet, steady rhythm, and I thought that was just what life was going to be now. Quiet, maybe even a little numb. But then, something happened. And I can't lie, it felt like the universe just decided to cut me a break. For the first time in a long time, things fell into place in a way I didn't expect. It started with work. I'd been doing my thing, getting by, trying to rebuild my career after a couple of years where I felt like I was just going through the motions. I was in a decent spot, but I wasn't exactly thriving. Then, one day, out of nowhere, my boss called me into his office. He handed me a project. A big one. A huge, company-wide initiative that was going to require every ounce of skill and attention I had. He looked at me and said, "I've been watching you, Ethan. You've really stepped up this year, and I think it's time you took on something bigger." I remember sitting there, just nodding, trying not to let my surprise show. I hadn't expected anything like this. I was used to just doing my job and getting paid for it. But this was a real opportunity. And not just for the job itself. It was a chance for me to prove to myself that I could do more than just survive. I could thrive. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about my past, about Clara, about anything that had hurt me. I was thinking about what I could do in the future, what kind of life I wanted to create. And when I took on that project, I threw everything into it, like it was my second chance at life. The hours were long, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like I was finally in control of something, and the results were there. The project turned out to be a huge success. And with it came recognition. More responsibility, a promotion, and a significant salary bump. I hadn't realized how much I needed that validation, how much I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of more than just being the guy who got cheated on. That wasn't who I was anymore. And it wasn't just the promotion. It was everything that came with it. I started feeling a sense of pride again, not just in my work, but in who I was. I was more confident, more sure of my own abilities. It felt like I had found this new gear in my life, one I didn't even know I had. But the real kicker came when I started looking at my personal life. I'd been hanging out with Rachel, of course. But our relationship had remained low pressure. Just fun, no expectations. She was patient with me, letting me go at my own pace. But then, about 6 months after we'd started seeing each other, something shifted. I'd gotten so comfortable in my own skin, and she noticed it. I'd stopped second-guessing everything. I'd stopped overthinking, worrying about the past, and wondering if I was worthy of someone else's love. Rachel saw the difference in me. She told me, one evening over dinner, that I seemed different. More at peace, like I'd finally let go of all the baggage I was carrying. And in that moment, I realized I had let go of the anger, the bitterness, the resentment. I had let go of the weight of the past that had kept me stuck for so long, and I was standing there, in front of someone who truly liked me for who I was now, not who I used to be. That felt like something new. So, after a few more months of growing together, laughing, taking trips, enjoying each other's company, I made a decision. I asked her if she'd like to move in together. It wasn't about rushing anything. It wasn't about filling a void. It was about building something that felt right. Something that wasn't weighed down by the mistakes of the past, something we could build on together. Rachel said yes, and I could see the excitement in her eyes, and in that moment, I felt like I had truly turned a corner. I wasn't the guy who had been left behind, who was struggling to find his place. I was Ethan again, and I was moving forward. So yeah, life got better. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some smooth, straight road to happiness. But it was real. My career had taken off in a way I hadn't expected. My personal life was calmer, less complicated, and more fulfilling than it had been in years. I wasn't looking for approval from anyone else anymore. I had come to understand that everything I needed to be happy was already within me. I just had to be patient enough to see it. The best part? I had found peace. Real peace. Not just in the quiet, but in the life I was building. And it wasn't just about finding love again, or finding success at work. It was about finding a version of myself that could stand tall, proud, and unashamed of what I'd been through. Clara. She didn't factor into this anymore. She had been a part of my story, but she wasn't my whole story. And in that moment, I realized I had everything I needed right in front of me. Things had gotten better. Much better than I ever thought possible. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my life, my happiness, and my future. I remember sitting on the porch of my new place, sipping coffee on a Saturday morning, staring out at the horizon, and just thinking about how far I'd come. It's one of those moments where everything slows down, and you can almost feel the weight of everything you've been through, good, bad, ugly, settling into place. And I don't know if it was the early morning light or just the fact that I was finally breathing easy, but I had this feeling that everything in my life was aligning in ways I couldn't have planned for, no matter how hard I tried. It had been a little over 2 years since the divorce, and honestly, it felt like a lifetime ago. A different lifetime. The guy who had been blindsided by Clara's betrayal, the one who stumbled through heartbreak, was long gone. In his place was someone who'd found his feet again, someone who wasn't afraid to ask for what he wanted and go after it with everything he had. But the crazy thing is, I didn't even realize I was going after it until I was already there. 4 years, I'd been so caught up in surviving that I hadn't even noticed I was moving toward something bigger than just putting one foot in front of the other. My career had taken off, yeah, but it wasn't just about the job anymore. It was never just about the paycheck or the promotion. It was about what I could build. About the impact I could make. I'd always dreamed of being in a position where I could shape things, lead something meaningful, and actually be proud of the work I did. But after all the chaos with Clara, I had stopped dreaming. I didn't think I deserved dreams anymore. I had always wanted to start my own company, but for years, I buried that idea. I told myself it was too risky, too impossible, too far out of reach. I spent my days looking at spreadsheets, managing other people's goals, thinking my dreams were just pipe dreams. But what I've learned through all of this, the pain, the recovery, the self-reflection, is that dreams don't come true by accident. They don't fall into your lap. They come from the choices you make, from the grit you put into the grind when no one's watching. And that's what I did. Slowly, methodically, but surely. I'll admit, when I first started sketching out ideas for my business, it felt crazy. It felt like something I shouldn't be doing, like I didn't have the right to pursue it. But with every late night, every small step, I began to see that this was my dream. Not the version of success I thought I was supposed to want, but my own. And once I stopped fighting myself, once I started believing that I could do it, everything started falling into place. Rachel was a huge part of this. She didn't push me, she didn't rush me, but she encouraged me every step of the way. She saw the ambition in me that I hadn't even realized was still there. When I'd get discouraged, she'd remind me of why I was doing it. She made me believe in my own potential in ways I hadn't in years. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about support. True, genuine support. She wanted to see me succeed, not for any selfish reason, but because she knew how much it meant to me. And that made all the difference. After a year of hard work, setting up the business, getting funding, putting together a team, I launched it. My own company. It wasn't a huge, overnight success. It wasn't some viral moment where everything just took off in an instant. But it was mine. It was something I built from the ground up, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for permission to succeed. I was making it happen. And sure, there were bumps along the way. There were moments when I thought about quitting, moments when I thought maybe I was crazy to go after this. But then I'd remember where I'd come from, the brokenness, the self-doubt, the betrayal, and I'd realize that this right here was the payoff. This was me proving that I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. This was me carving out my future, on my terms. I'm not saying I'm some millionaire, sitting on a beach with my laptop and a cocktail. But my business is doing well. It's growing. And more importantly, it's fulfilling. I'm making a difference, even if it's in small ways. I'm building something I'm proud of, and the pride I feel in that is something I never thought I'd feel again after everything that went down with Clara. But the real magic happened in my personal life. I was finally happy in a way that went beyond just surviving. I was content. I was whole. The bitterness, the anger, the resentment, all of that had faded away. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. I was living in the present, with a future I actually looked forward to. Rachel and I moved in together not long after I launched the company. I'd asked her to be part of this new chapter in my life, and she said yes. We didn't rush anything, but I think we both knew this was it. This was something real. We built a life together that was stable, full of laughter, and grounded in the simple things. We didn't need grand gestures or big moments to feel secure. We just needed each other, and the peace we had built. And that's when I realized it. True happiness isn't some big moment that arrives when you're done with everything. It's the quiet, day-to-day moments where you feel at ease with yourself. Where you're not running from your past or chasing someone else's dream. Where you can just be. I found that peace in the silence. In the work. In the love I've built with Rachel. In the life I've carved out for myself. True happiness doesn't come from what you lose or even what you gain. It comes from understanding that, no matter what happened to you, you have the power to create the life you want. And that's exactly what I did. I've learned to trust in myself again. To believe that, even after all the mess, there was something worth fighting for. And for the first time in my life, I'm truly, finally at peace with everything that came before.